This week, President Obama declaring that the U.S. will ultimately destroy ISIS, the terror group that's rampaging through Iraq and Syria, sweeping up thousands of fresh recruits along the way. And today, the U.S. warning Americans in Uganda of a possible terror plot there and urging them to stay at home. This coming after Uganda says they found a massive al-Shabaab terrorist cell. Joining me now, Christian Whiton. He's a former State Department senior advisor and president of the Hamilton Foundation. Good to see you, Christian.
Great to be here, Arthel. Thanks.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's start with Uganda. I mean, as I just said, you have the U.S. Embassy telling all U.S. citizens to stay indoors. An imminent threat coming from al-Shabaab, as you well know, reminding our audience that the U.S. killed their leader recently. So I just want you to sort of bring this home to us here in America. Let us understand why this is important and really what this means.
Well, it's another one of these wildfires around the world that continues to rage. And basically, this came from Somalia. Al-Shabaab is the local al-Qaeda or, Islamist jihadist group there. And it's spreading. Not only here in Uganda, but there was a major attack in Kenya that targeted foreigners, Westerners, Christians at a mall. Really quite gory. And now you have this in Uganda. The government has acted. But it shows a problem with, frankly, the U.S. policy strategy of trying just to decapitate terrorist groups. You can go and kill the top guy. We did it with bin Laden. We did it with al-Shabaab. But they continue to operate. They're fairly low-tech, durable groups. And you need to have ground presence. You need to have intelligence. You need to work with locals. None of that's terribly appealing because it means getting our feet wet in places that really aren't great places to be. But unfortunately, the alternative is that these jihadist groups control more and more geography.
And that is going to bring us to this war on ISIS and what that means. And of course, there's going to be airstrikes. There's going to be lots of humanitarian aid. There will be some aid in terms of intelligence, etc. It's still the American public is trying to grapple with the exact strategy. So are some lawmakers. And just as it stands now, Christian, I understand your take is that this is a recipe for a prolonged, inconclusive war, and Americans don't have an appetite for that, right?
No, unfortunately, and frankly, the gradual involvement, I mean, people overuse the Vietnam analogy, but I think it is apt in this case. There's less than meets the eye with the strategy. We've already been spending some money on the Syrian opposition, which is part of the president's plan. So it's not new. It's just moving it from more opaque funding, covert funding, to what's called Title 50 funding, which is more direct with Pentagon. Similarly, the airstrikes are going to be pretty modest, and there's nothing in the plan, and this is, I think, the crucial lapse, that really will get the Sunnis in Sunni Iraq to rise against the IS. They're just not going to trust the Baghdad government, which is dominated by Shiites. So there are, I think, a couple of fundamental problems with the plan.
Yeah, because you were saying they can't survive without or just depending solely on the backing and resources from the Shiite government. It's not to be trusted.
That's right. I mean, we forget that they were betrayed, the Sunnis. Essentially, when the surge came in 2007, when we put down the insurgency, a big part of that was enlisting Sunnis, they were called the Sons of Iraq, to turn on other Sunnis, al-Qaeda terrorists. But unfortunately, as we withdrew, we moved them from our payroll to Maliki's payroll, to the Baghdad government, and he, in turn, persecuted them. He didn't follow through on his promises. He was not inclusive. So now we're asking these very same people to once again trust that dysfunctional Baghdad government, and meanwhile, they're surrounded by the IS. They look at these guys funny. They're dead. There's no real mechanism in place just yet to get them funded. Money. And if we're just saying, we'll get you some help now, but then turn on them and then we'll set you up later, that's not going to be convincing for them. And so what you're left with is the next president is going to inherit an Iraq that is 3 different Iraqs, that has an Islamic State, jihadistan present, and this problem isn't going to go away, and it's going to be a long war.
And let's talk about our president, President Obama, and pardon me, in terms of congressional approval for what his aggressions against ISIS. Should he seek congressional approval or not? And go ahead, let me answer that first, and I may follow up.
I think he should, not because the Constitution requires him to. He is the commander-in-chief, and as Alexander Hamilton, one of the founders, wrote in the Federalist Paper, the military in particular is something that lends itself to be guided by a single hand. You can't run wars by committee. But many presidents, George H.W. Bush in Gulf War I and President George W. Bush, in whose administration I served, went to Congress for pragmatic reasons, that you at least get them on board. They're not going to stay on board. Congressmen, do blow with the wind a lot, especially when things turn bad. But essentially now, President Obama is going to war without any real indication of support from Congress. They'll give him the money he asked for. That's likely to be rolled into a continuing resolution or in a standalone bill very soon. But having Congress with you does have some pragmatic utility.
But in fairness, quickly, isn't there a big political situation at play? You've got the midterms in 50 days. Nobody wants to be on record to support it. They want the president to go alone, so they don't. It's off their hands. I wash my hands of it.
Probably depends on the state. Mary Landrieu from conservative Louisiana might like to go and be able to say she supported a plan to take the fight to the IS so that, when gas prices go up, when they put Iraq's oil in peril, et cetera, she can say, I did something. So I think you'd have to look at state by state.
Christian Whiton, thank you